Hi, and welcome to my5things.com. My name is Megan Matson, and I have the great honor and privilege of being in conversation with Stuart Stevens tonight. Hello, Stuart.
Megan, thank you. It's great to see you. Great to talk.
Yeah, a pleasure. For this class tonight, we're really structured around Stuart's amazing book, The Conspiracy to End America: 5 Ways My Old Party is Driving Our Democracy to Autocracy. I'm just going to highlight sort of the structure of the 5 ways after introducing Stuart. This is my first long interview, so I even have note cards in preparation. Very unusual. Uh, Stuart, I was just remembering the first time that you and I met in person, and it was, I think, 2021. Big Lincoln Project supporter. It was a Lincoln Project event. I think the folks had been through a little patch of tumult, and you said, "Good to meet you. You're one of, I think, 5 people who've been with us through thick and thin, and in a bad patch. We could always say Megan still likes us. So here we are some years later, going strong, and it's a delight. So just to introduce Stuart Stevens for any of you on the line who are not aware of his really varied and powerhouse career. You helped elect more Republicans to top office than anyone in your tribe, as you say. 5 presidential campaigns, 6 if you add 2020. And then by the by, 9 books on the side, articles in Esquire, New Yorker, across the board, and a lot of writing in Hollywood. I was delighted to come across a mention of yours that the political work really suited you because it was seasonal, and you could write copiously on the side. So I just wanted to read one quote of yours, teeing this up. While I was focused on beating Democrats, an evil was building in the Republican Party, an anti-democratic, pro-autocracy movement based on white grievance. And I think that has really summed a lot of the root, and what you have discovered, and I think done such a strong mea culpa, and then really committed your every hour to defeating that party that had been so subsumed. So the 5 ways that we're going to that Stuart's going to cover that this GOP overtake is structured is really the propagandists, the support of a major party, the financiers, the legal theories to legitimize what they're doing, and then the shock troops. So, Stuart, just teeing up the propagandists.
Mhm.
Um, I I really found in your book, It Was All a Lie, your New York Times bestseller. Uh, you were so honest in the opening about your own first experience with the race card, which feels like sort of the root of so much of the propaganda through the decades. Could you discuss that first race of yours
Yeah,
and
sure,
how?
sure. It's great to be here. I think we don't talk enough about race and Trumpism and politics where we are today. Um, and 85% of Trump's coalition is white in a country that's 59% white and less so while we're talking. We talk about how the country is going to become a majority minority country. But in many ways, it already has. If you're 16 years and younger, the majority of Americans are non-white. And all the Stephen Millers in the world aren't going to change that. And I sort of stumbled into making television commercials for A guy who had run the office of a congressman that I had been a page of in high school. And his boss was running for the Senate, and he decided to run for Congress. And he was running against the son of a famous sitting, very powerful US senator. And this was in Mississippi. And nobody thought he could win. And I was at UCLA Film School, and I'd stayed in touch with him. He'd been my boss when I was a page. And he called me up and said, I'm running for office. I don't have any money. I'm going to lose. But you have to make commercials for me because I can't afford to hire anybody. And I said, well, that's great, except like, I don't know how to make commercials. I just make these stupid little films. He goes, doesn't matter. You have to do this. So I ended up working for him, and he ended up winning through nothing that I did. He was just in the right place in the right time. But in that race, my guy was a Republican running against a Democrat. And there was also a third party African-American independent in the race. And it became pretty obvious. I mean, this was the first race I'd worked in, but you look at polling, 90% of the African-American vote, if it was a two-way choice, was going to go to the Democrat. And this was a district of in Mississippi, when Mississippi had 5 congressional districts. I can't remember the exact number, but it was probably about 35% African American. So, if you do the math and the other guy gets 90% of 35%, you got to get a whole bunch of the remaining 65%. But there was this independent candidate. The trouble was nobody knew that there was an independent candidate running. He didn't have any money. He didn't have the backing of the Democratic Party because the white son of a famous US senator was a Democratic nominee. So I made a commercial. I thought it was very clever at the time. It wasn't at all per se racist. It was more like a sort of League of Women Voters ad. They just said there are 3 candidates running and put up 3 pictures of the candidates. Went through their names, and one has a chance to be the first African American elected to House of Representatives from Mississippi since Reconstruction. So we spent money to inform people that there was an African American in the race, and it worked. My guy won. I forget the exact numbers, but he didn't get 50%. In the same way Bill Clinton didn't get 50% when Perot was running. But the independent candidate took a big hunk of the African American vote, which really blocked the way for the Democrat to win. And, I didn't really think much about it at the time. I mean, the honest truth is, in most of my political career, I just was a campaign guy. I liked to win or lose. I had a very simplistic value structure. I felt good if I won. I felt bad if I lost. And I didn't really think about it much. I never went into government. There are a few people I think who can do both well. I knew that I wouldn't be one. So I took an attitude sort of like I just elect them, they're on their own after that. And that was, that first race was a good lesson in the power of race and the power of propaganda to change that. And I think where we are now is very much the same. I think it's fascinating. 1956, Eisenhower got 39% of the black vote. It fell off a cliff with Goldwater in 1964 when he opposed the Civil Rights Act. Goldwater got 7%. Now, I think you could have made a case at the time that if there was, after the Civil Rights Act passed, that for reasons of shared cultural values, cultural conservatism, faith, entrepreneurship, patriotism, that some African Americans would have drifted back to the Republican Party in some numbers. But it didn't happen. Goldwater got 7%, Trump got 8%. So that's 1 point every 56 years. So that's going to take a while. And I think that that's at the root of a lot of our issues. And I think Trumpism is more than any other factor driven by race.
And on this propagandist point, before I get to the obvious of Fox and the, you can't two sides of a lie, I just also appreciated how you skewered another aspect of propaganda, which is this false nostalgia. When you talked about, Reagan, there's a rosy Republican lens over Reagan, but you highlight his
Yep.
play of that card, and then Buckley as well, as though there was some pure intellectual root there.
Yeah, it's interesting. William Buckley's become the former editor of founder of the National Review, founded with his dad's money, by the way. Was the great American tradition. He chose his parents well. Now William Buckley is held with some justification by those that miss the old Republican Party, that here was a guy who was a true intellectual, which Buckley was, and a gentleman, which he was, erudite, had television show that was the kind of show that probably was on public television. I can't remember. But the truth is that Buckley started out as a stone cold racist. He wrote pieces for the National Review and started that was a call for segregation. Now he later recanted. I think you have to give him credit. I don't think it was disingenuous. But there was a famous Oxford Union debate between William Buckley and James Baldwin. And as soon as this thing is over, you should go on YouTube and find this.
I've watched that.
Amazing pieces of video. Because James Baldwin at that point had sort of adopted this kind of English accent. And you had William Buckley, who had that weird lockjaw New England accent that made him sound like, he'd learned English as a second language or something. And the two of them go at it. Two brilliant people. And Baldwin just completely destroys Buckley. And it's apparent when you see it now. But interestingly, after the Oxford Union, where I used to be a member, by the way, but never was invited to debate for good reason, they have a vote, like who won the debate. And Buckley lost this thing overwhelmingly. And I don't think that would have been the vote going into that debate. Mm-hmm. I'm sure the audience was 99.9% white for one thing. And Oxford then, well, to some degree now too, was hardly a bastion of liberalism. But that was at the root of a lot of republicanism. And then, of course, there was the famous Southern strategy, which was Richard Nixon's plan when there were all of these, to convert white Democrats in the South to Republicans. It is something the Republican Party often brings up now. More Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Act than Democrats did, which is factually accurate. But the Democrats who voted against it were all Southern Democrats from the former Confederate states. They later became Republicans or were followed by Republicans for the most part in office. And there was Pat Buchanan, if you remember Pat Buchanan, who was started as a speechwriter for Nixon. He and this other guy wrote a sort of infamous memo. They were working in the White House to the Nixon campaign, to the president. You can find it online. And it basically laid out the predicate for the Southern strategy, which really was all about propaganda too. Mm-hmm. And their premise went, Nixon had done a lot for African Americans, which actually he had, much more so than he probably gets credit for. But African Americans were not going to vote for Nixon. They wrote it from sort of a bitter, like, we've done all this, but they're not still going to vote for us. Therefore, there was nothing that Nixon could do to get African Americans to vote for him. Therefore, he needed to either suppress the African American vote, or he needed to divide the African American vote so that it would vote. There were independent candidates at the time that they could go for. And when you read that, and you read about what the Russians did in 2016, it's an exact roadmap of what they did when they created these fake groups
Mhm.
that were like African Americans for Trump. And a lot of the Facebook groups that were supposedly former Democrats or African Americans who now are converted to Trump were all started by Russians. It's the exact same strategy that was adopted by Nixon, which is just kind of fascinating. Um,
I'm wondering if you could speak to a couple aspects of the propagandists rolling forward to today,
yeah,
where there is that through line to Tucker Carlson's, 400 mentions of replacement theory. But I think there's a false symmetry that I know in forming Resolute Square together, you and I and the whole crew are really trying to call out. Can you talk about that, the sort
yeah,
of symmetry around media and journalism?
yeah. It's fascinating how a right-wing media ecosystem developed. Um, Now, the origins of this, I go into it and it was all a lie. I didn't understand the origins of this. And it's really fascinating to me. This sense that conservatives believe that they're the only ones that have the truth, and they're the truth tellers. And what we now would call mainstream journalism, they're not telling the truth, and that we are separate, and we really are the ones that know the truth. You have to listen to us. The origins of that were in a magazine that was published after World War II called Human Events. Now, when I was coming up in politics, Human Events was considered so right-wing, even as Republicans, that we used to jokingly refer to it as Inhuman Events. And I always assumed that Human Events was started by two like right-wing wackos that, but they weren't. Human Events was started, and this is fascinating to me, by two former Haverford, the Quaker College, Pennsylvania, professors who both believed that the mainstream journalism in the United States had been taken over by a patriotic jingoism promoting World War II. One of them wrote an infamous essay after Pearl Harbor in the Saturday Evening Post, arguing why we shouldn't go to war with Japan, which after Pearl Harbor was like a pretty minority position. Um, and it was out of that sense that they knew the truth, that this sort of barrier began to form between other media and mainstream media. So if you look around today, it's one of the reasons we started Resolute Square. It is striking there is not a pro-democracy media platform with that as its mission in America. And there are plenty on the right. I mean, Fox News has really kind of become the New York Times of right-wing journalism compared to all these other outlets out there. Which is not to say that Fox News isn't terrible, but it is. But there's so many that just have absolutely no pretense of being journalism. Um, and I think the reason for this is that those who supported democracy, those who believe that the United States Constitution was valid, all of that, they saw that they had a voice in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, on NBC News, on ABC, in the Indianapolis Star, in these leading newspapers across the country, the St. Petersburg Times. So they were that voice, and they never felt the need to create another alternative voice to that. But the problem that we realized with Trumpism is for that generation of journalism, right, several generations, the greatest good was held to be objectivity. And, I have a lot of journalism friends. I write a lot of articles. So I'm not a press hater at all. But I think when you saw in 2016 with the emergence of Trump, journalists really began to struggle with this, and they still are, which goes back to a sort of basic question: how do you tell both sides of a lie? And I think that what we've realized is like so much of our civil society is based upon accepted norms, that at least there would be some fundamental good faith effort between both parties to adhere to something close to the truth. Now, there would be both, there would be, government would lie, certainly. I mean, the Vietnam War history of journalism is a lot about journalists holding the lies of the government accountable, the Pentagon Papers. But that at the center, there could be some agreed to truths that you could get to and move forward. But it's not really equipped to deal with Trump, who has no relationship to the truth, and a party that now has adopted Trumpism.
Yeah, and I think a lot of viewers and listeners of media have had a tough time getting past the sense that there's a right and a left
Right.
in media, not a right, a left, and then propaganda. And I think you had highlighted one difference would be if President Obama had come out with a Muslim ban, the mainstream news wouldn't have backed him on it. And there's that fealty where if the leader breaks a norm, normal journalism critiques the leader, propaganda attacks the norm. Can you talk? You had a really interesting underlying force that really talked about the radicalization aim of propaganda. So it's not just information.
I think it's really important. So I worked for Bush in 2004.
I forgive you.
The last time that Republican won the popular vote, and the only time since 1988 the Republicans have won the popular vote. So had Bush lost Ohio, we would have lost the race. And the vote in Ohio was came down to a good bit less than the home crowd of an Ohio State game. So if you remember, the evening of 2004 election night, Bush did not declare victory. Now, in Bush world, we knew that we had won because there were these things called provisional ballots, which when you go to vote, if they don't have you registered, you can ask for a provisional ballot, and that retains your right to vote. Those provisional ballots are later sorted out the next day or can take a couple of days. So we knew there weren't enough provisional ballots out there for Kerry won 100% of them. He still wasn't going to win. But Bush wouldn't declare victory, which is really interesting. And trust me, there were people inside the Republican Party that were screaming for him to go out there and declare victory. He waited until the next day, and in this very kind of low-key ceremony at the RNC or event at the RNC, it was acknowledged that he won. So what had happened if John Kerry hadn't acknowledged that? What would have happened if he had done what Trump did? Now, Trump lost by 7 million and did this. So the 2004 race was much closer. I don't think there's any question that the papers who had endorsed Trump, endorsed Kerry, which were most of the major papers in America, the Post, the New York Times, they would have taken John Kerry's head off. They would have said, have you lost your mind? This is democracy. You lost. And the same with Al Gore. I wrote a piece for the Washington Post on the, I guess would be the 23rd anniversary of when Gore versus Bush decision came down and Gore conceded. And in this piece I wrote, we don't talk enough about what a hero Al Gore is. Because think about it. If anybody had the ability to tear the country apart that night, it was Al Gore. You had this race and all coming down to 534 votes in Florida. Our system is really not designed to be accurate to those sort of tolerances. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think someone at MIT did a study that if you counted every vote in Florida, you would have to do it some monumental number of times to come to the exact same number. It was like, you have to, like 10,000 times you'd have to count every vote.
So could we, one thing I wanted to just ask the audience, welcome any questions specific to this
Please, yeah.
role of propaganda and where we sit today, February 7th, 2024, with the clock ticking down. Perhaps you could comment on Tucker in Russia campaigning for Putin and what that sort of radicalizing propaganda impact may have on
Yeah,
this.
I mean, I don't think we spend enough time talking about and accepting. In 2016, Russia supported Trump. There's no question about that. I mean, every U.S. intelligence agency has agreed with that. The Republican-led Senate Intelligence Agency Committee agreed that Russia helped Trump. The only question is, was it decisive? And in politics, causality is the hardest thing to determine. But Russia elected Trump, helped elect Trump. What did Russia get? Well, it turns out they got a lot. So you have Tucker Carlson, who is operating as a arm of the Putin propaganda machine. And in one of the most extraordinary reversals in American political history, what was the core of the most consistent opposition to communism, totalitarianism, Soviet Union, Russia, the conservative element of the Republican Party, right? That was defined by that moment of Ronald Reagan standing in front of the Berlin Wall, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. That element of American politics is now the home of the pro-Putin, pro-Russia element of American politics. And it's to someone like myself, this is just unbelievable. I mean, this is like waking up and you know, the earth is the sky is green. It's just unbelievable. And there are so many similarities between what has happened to journalism and journalists under Putin, particularly since the full-scale invasion, and what Tucker is doing and what Fox News. There's no relationship to truth. Mm-hmm. Dissent is not tolerated. And even these journalists know they're not telling the truth. Now, I know Tucker Carlson. I mean, I knew Tucker. I've known him forever. And, Tucker, to me, I think it's fair to say, is the perfect example of the sort of person who is open to hostile foreign power persuasion, which isn't to say he's a spy, because he's not really in a position to be a spy, but he has all those trademarks. He is someone who feels rejected by the class that he wanted to be a part of. He really wanted to be an intellectual. He wanted to be taken seriously as a writer. But he was fired by Tina Brown, who edited The New Yorker when she did Talk Magazine. That's when I first met Tucker, when he came down in 2000 to Austin to write a piece for Tina Brown on Bush. He was fired by CNN. He was fired by MSNBC. Then he finally washed up at Fox. And he was fired by Fox. Like, how bad do you have to be to get fired by Fox because you lied, as the Dominion lawsuit showed? When he would, he knew that like everybody did, that Trump had lost, and there's all these emails, and then he goes out and says the exact opposite and attacks the Dominion voting systems.
So tying that to the months ahead, it would be great, I think, to highlight, if you could, the Red Dawn dads and some of the targeting work that Lincoln Project is doing as a way to sort of pierce through the propaganda silos, recipient voters. And I just want any opportunity we get in this conversation to answer the most asked, least answered question: what do we do? What are we doing? How are we winning this? Would be great.
Well, look, I think that in this primary, it's been a fascinating further proof test case of where the Republican Party is. So if you look at Iowa caucus, first, there's an extraordinary number, at least to me, that was revealed in the Des Moines Register polling on the Iowa caucus, which is considered sort of a gold standard of polling by this woman named Ann Seltzer. The Republican Party in Iowa is now 68% male. Think about that. You've driven so many women out of the party. You're down to 68% men. And overwhelmingly, the vote that went to Trump were those who believed the election was stolen. You go to New Hampshire. Now, independents can vote in New Hampshire in whatever primary they want. And if you're a Democrat, you can go in to vote in a Republican primary and register that day as an independent. So it's really open to all comers. Trump won by, I think, 11 points, 11 and a half, but he won Republicans overwhelmingly, like by 30 or something points. And Nikki Haley's vote were non-Republicans. So what does this mean? I think that today, if I ran the Biden campaign and I'm involved in the Lincoln Project, and our position is there's really nothing you can do to convert a hardcore Trump voter. And it is the hardest thing to do in politics. And in politics, you should do the easiest things first. Sort of like in business, you should make the easy money first before you try to do the hardest things. And in this election, it is probably going to come down to a relatively small number of voters, probably 400,000 voters, in 4 or 5 key states. For the most part, those are college-educated voters. And in the research that we've done associated with the Lincoln Project, we kind of divided them into a couple of categories that I think are fascinating. One we call Dodd, dads, and moms. And these are mostly under 55 voters who consider themselves moderate to conservative. Majority of them, like the country, are pro-choice, but they're certainly not abortion activists. But they have been appalled by the extremism of the Dodd decision. And these are voters who are post-Roe v. Wade voters. So Roe v. Wade, for all their voting life, was a given. It was a law of the land. And they see it as a right that was taken away. And those are voters that a good number of them voted for Biden in 20. And they're essential for Biden to keep to be able to win this election. And there's another group of voters that we call Red Dawn conservatives. These are older voters who grew up in the Cold War. Many of them were drawn to Reagan. And while they agree with Trump on more than the Dodd dads and moms do, they are overwhelmingly pro-Ukraine. And the idea that the United States would be any sort of way supporting Putin's Russia is just anathema to them. And that is a wedge that I think allows the Biden campaign to access a lot of these voters. I'll just say one thing about the current polling, much has been made about Biden's 38% approval rating, which historically no president's been reelected with a 38% approval rating. I personally think that these numbers are really not relevant now, because we've never had a situation in which majority of the other party believed that the holder of the White House, the incumbent president, was an illegal president. So if you believe that Joe Biden stole the White House, how are you going to what you say? Okay, stole the White House, all right, but what about that Infrastructure Act? What about the CHIPS Act, huh? I mean, you're never going to give the guy a break. So if I was polling in this, and sort of am to a certain degree, I would do a screening question. Before polls, you always ask these screening questions. Do you register to vote? How often do you vote? Blah, blah, blah. I would say, do you believe that Joe Biden is a legally elected president? And if you said no, I would just end the interview. Because what do you need to know about these people?
No.
And when you throw those people out, Biden's approval rating goes up to a much more standard level. But you're also seeing in a couple of states, polls that have come out recently, one in New Hampshire and one in Pennsylvania, where Biden's approval rating was 38, but he was winning by 9 points. And I think you're going to see a historic diversion between approval rating and vote share in this election. Um,
Perfect. So we've got some really good questions coming in. So I'm going to take a question interlude. And I think I might take the first one here. If it's going to come down to these key people in these key states, what do the rest of us do to make a difference? We can't all move to Georgia, et cetera. That's just timely. I had some folks asking me what to focus on this year. And so I started out and just laid out a personal plan of action for the year, in addition to the work on Resolute Square and Lincoln Project support. I've always found that getting going on really tangible actions, and this ties into a great question that we got in advance from a self-described red diaper baby. I had to look up the term. It means
communist paper, yes,
yeah,
from the 50s.
Omni baby. Now 83 in a power wheelchair with an iPad and a phone ready to help reelect President Biden and wants to know what to do. So I spoke to a group last night of just friends, not year-round political people, but they are as concerned as I think all of us are about this being the last election before our autocracy. If we don't win that small number of votes in that small number of states. So voter registration, in addition to what Lincoln Project is focused on in terms of the targeting of those registered voters who need to hear something besides the propaganda and have that opening of the Dobbs dads, moms, and the Red Dawn dads. I actually signed up with the Field Team 6, which partners with the union.us at Lincoln Project. Effortless. Go to Field Team 6, effortless. Getting started training on text banking for voter registration in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, Nevada. Who am I missing right now?
Could be Georgia, could be.
Yeah. So they'll set you up to text bank any hours and postcarding is what we're actually doing. There's a QR code so that the person receiving your personal postcard can go straight to the voter registration site, and then that new voter can actually be on carried through to election day and really driven to the polls, literally or figuratively, and then phone banking, and then travel. So as part of my personal plan, and then these other groups that are forming informally, blocking out time in the fall, especially if you adopt one of these swing states. I think I'm committing to Wisconsin personally. Blocking out some time in the fall where you're actually going to go help turn out that vote, and the training is easily accessible. And the second you make a sort of big action commitment like that in your own life, then when politics comes up and the election comes up and people want to hand wring about the polls, you're talking about what you're doing, and it changes people's focus. And as I think a mutual great source of ours, Simon Rick says, worry less, do more. So that's an answer to a couple of questions on what can you do? Make a plan, get going, grab a friend, and we can send out a lot of these links for the resources. But I'd start with Field Team 6 because it's such
That's a great suggestion. One of the fascinating turns have happened in our politics. Yeah, there's always been a majority of the country that was pro-choice. I mean, it depends on how you define pro-choice and everything, but 65+% are. But the intensity on the issue used to be with the anti-abortion side, which I guess makes sense. They're fighting for something. That's now reversed, where the intensity is on the pro-choice side. And that is a huge element in politics. You know, you do what we call regression analysis, and you get down to what is really motivating your vote. I mean, very few people are pro-terrorism. Everybody agrees. But how many people are actually voting on terrorism as an issue? And that's what you care about. And now you've seen a real switch. And the same on the gun issue. It used to be with guns that the NRA types they had all the energy. They were the ones who were voting on this single issue. Now that's switched, where there's much more energy on those who are supporting more reasonable gun laws. And you know, one of the elements that I talk about in this book, one of the five that you mentioned, is when autocracies evolve from democracies, one of the key elements is a changing legal structure that justifies it. And if you see, after January 6th, there were 46 states that introduced new voting laws. Now, not all of those were restrictive, but more were than not.
Yep.
And it is a hugely underappreciated effort that is underway. And it's being done by the pro-autocracy side under the radar screen deliberately. They don't want to talk about it. I mean, whenever democracies slide into autocracies, autocrats rarely call themselves autocrats. You know, I mean, they don't say, well, you know, we're going to end this democracy thing. It's a hallmark that they use the privileges and rights of a democracy, like free press, free to associate, to end those freedoms. But if people are now pretty familiar with the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society is a conservative group that's had a tremendous impact upon driving our judiciary to a more conservative bent. Now, the Federalist Society started in 1984 at a weekend seminar retreat at Yale under the sort of benign name of what is the future of the conservative judiciary? You know, it sounded like a boring way to spend a weekend. And out of that grew the Federalist Society, which it's hard to say that they haven't won. And a guy named Leonard Leo emerged as a driving force behind the Federalist Society. Leonard Leo has been given the largest political donation in U.S. history, $1.6 billion. A gentleman who started and owned all of an obscure but very profitable electronics company in Detroit, gave all of his stock to Leonard Leo. Leonard Leo put it in a trust. It was given actually to a trust that was formed. It was then sold to an Irish holding company for $1.6 billion. The money went to the trust, which allowed them to shield it from a lot of the taxes. And now with that $1.6 billion, he is funding multiple efforts to change how we vote in America. Because if you go back to those demographics, and demographics aren't destiny in politics, but they are if you don't change. So in a world in which your vote is 85% white and the country's becoming less white, what do you do about that? Well, you have two choices. Either do the hard work to appeal to more non-white voters, and the Republican Party has failed to do that. Or you make it harder for those people to vote. You sort of start to curate the vote. So if the Georgia legislature passes a law that says that they can overrule the popular vote, when they do it, it's perfectly legal.
Yeah. I want to mark for the people on the line who enjoy some structure and sense of time. We just moved to another one of the pillars of how your old party is moving us toward autocracy, and that is changing the legal theories, as you said, legitimize their actions. And I love something that you say, no one winning the game changes the rules.
It's true.
So it's definitely
very telling that they're trying to change these rules.
Yeah. I just it really struck me when you pointed out that the Bush v. Gore night, you said I celebrated the night it all started to go wrong. And you called Bush v. Gore the gateway drug, the
Yes,
slow fire that was lit when you discovered, oh, we could decide this. We could nudge it at the court, not at the ballot. So
yes.
on the what do we do about this in this timeline heading up, and what's the good news around this topic? Do you want to say anything about Mark Elias, Democracy Docket, and the sort of tear of a fight, the good fight they've been on?
Yeah, Mark Elias is a modern hero of our times. He's an attorney who has this law firm that specializes in challenging these restrictive voting laws. Um, until recently, the courts have overwhelmingly ruled in the direction of including more people in voting to make it easier. And there's still a trend that way, but these laws have to be challenged. And this is a battle that you can fight on multiple levels. To a shocking degree, our elections in America are run by volunteers, people who volunteer for elections. And these are people, it's important to do that. And it is going to be a concerted effort by Republicans to do sort of anti-voter fraud, they would call it. And that is to put their own people in running, volunteering at these precincts, to put people in the precincts as poll watchers. They also have focused on electing Secretary of States, who pretty much in every state, the Secretary of State is the one who runs the elections. And in some states like Pennsylvania, the governor appoints the Secretary of State. So therefore, the governor becomes the key figure. So I think that looking at your local elections and how they're run and what you can do to get involved in that is critically important. I personally think that we ought to spend a lot more money on elections in America.
Yeah.
If you look at the problem where there are issues in voting, they tend to be poor areas. There really is not voter fraud in America. And I can say that for somebody that, did elections for like 30 years. There really isn't. I mean, if you think about it, it's a felony. Who wakes up in the morning and says, I want to commit a felony by voting? Our problem in America is we can't get people to vote when it's legal. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. And it really has become just a straw man to use to pass more restrictive voting laws. And I think, people say, well, how will you know when the Republican Party has become a different kind of party? And it'll be when they try to make it easier for people to vote.
Nice.
Because when you do that, you're saying, look, if everybody voted, we'd win.
Ah.
That's how democracy should be, right? I mean, so I'm kind of a nut on this issue. I wouldn't even think about going to the Australian system where you get fined if you don't vote.
Yeah.
But there's about 10 of us in America that agree with that. But
we've covered the propagandists. I've got a couple cleanup questions on that. I'll do at the end if we can. The changing of the legal rules to legitimize anti-democratic authoritarian actions. So the support of a major party is critical there. I'd love, you've got a JFK quote, sometimes party loyalty asks too much. And you also have a wonderful story about your dad, Hoover, and the FBI that I think is really relevant to the what so many in your old party were not able to say. Can you talk about your dad?
Yeah, my dad, I'm a seventh generation Mississippian. My dad went to Ole Miss, University of Mississippi, undergrad and law school. And then he became an FBI agent. And this is a few years before World War II. He was assigned to Manhattan and was living with another guy from Mississippi who was an FBI agent. And they were having the time of their lives. They were, spending their days chasing would-be German spies. They were the ones around New York City. and going to the theater at night. I mean, it was like a wonderful thing. Um, and then the war broke out and Pearl Harbor, and he was ordered, all the FBI agents were ordered to participate in a roundup of Asian Americans or Asians, many of whom were Asian Americans. And my dad did it for a day and he quit. And he went and enlisted in the Navy, ended up spending 3 years in the South Pacific, 28 island landings. I don't know if there's an easy war, but his was a rough war. Lost a lot of friends, but he never regretted it. And his lesson to that was that you can always say no. And that's what the Republican Party has lost. And I just look at these people I helped elect, and I never would have thought they'd go along with Trump. I mean, why? So you lose a primary. I mean, being a U.S. Senator is not that great of a job. I mean, it's really, I don't understand it. But one of the major differences of this moment and other moments is that you do have a major party that has adopted Trumpism, which is to adopt autocracy.
Mhm.
And that's one of those 5 key elements that hasn't been there before. So if you go to the 1930s, there was a huge fascist movement in America, led by Lindbergh, Henry Ford. Why did America become fascist? Well, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, they didn't endorse this. They stayed within the American framework of mainstream. And FDR was president. So probably the lesson there is that what we used to study when we had civics classes, that leadership matters. So, say what you will about your views of Mitt Romney politically. If Mitt Romney had been elected president in 2012, he would have led this same party in a very different direction. And I think people have a good sense of that now because you have a good sense of Mitt. I mean, he became the first senator in U.S. history to vote to impeach a member of his own party. So what is just so distressing about this is how so few in the Republican Party said no. Liz Cheney said no. Mitt Romney has said no. Adam Kinzinger has said no. But you can count them really, the leading figures, on 2 hands.
Yeah.
So Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley in 2016, before the South Carolina primary, she endorsed Marco Rubio. She gave this powerful speech that Donald Trump represented everything she taught her children not to be. Donald Trump wins the nomination. She endorses Trump. She becomes a UN appointment for him, becomes part of the Trump administration. And then she's running for president. And when asked, would you support a nominated party if they were convicted of a felony? Meaning, would you support Donald Trump if he was convicted of a felony for overthrowing the United States government, basically? She raised her hand and said yes.
Yeah. So
And
on the good news, what do we do front? I've heard from early on you and Rick Wilson saying the greatest political teacher is pain.
yep,
We need to beat this thing 2, maybe 3 election cycles. MAGA is losing. Can
yes.
you discuss that effect
Yeah,
and
I think,
the results?
right now, there is not a coherent, sane, center-right conservative party in America. And there are a lot of sane, center-right conservative Americans. So you have a disparity between the market and what the market is offering. And hopefully market forces are going to correct this. And what are market forces in politics? We call them elections. And so basically we have to drive the Republican Party as it exists now to bankruptcy. We have to defeat these Republicans. And you have to do it over and over until they realize we cannot win with Trumpism. And then, out of self-preservation, hopefully they will begin to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, we get caught up in this issue or that issue, but in a larger cultural sense, Trumpism is about the past. It's about an imaginary past, as you were saying. Make America great again. What does that mean? Some sort of, for a lot of Trump voters, it meant when being white gave you certain privileges that maybe are beginning to be questioned now. And it's about the past. And what does it look at these cultural issues? If I ran the Democratic Party, I would wake up every day trying to get in a culture war. So look at what happens. You have Republican Party, Trump, they take on Nike and Colin Kaepernick. Who won? Nike made $9 billion. You had the Republican Party. Remember, they got in a fight with NASCAR when NASCAR wanted to ban the Confederate flag. So you're in the Republican Party and you're in a culture war with NASCAR? Really?
And now Taylor Swift.
I mean, so then they have a nominee who a jury convicts finds liable for sexual assault, which a judge defines as rape. So to fix that problem with women, they decide to get in a fight with called Taylor Swift. I mean, there is just this is a world that is not where America is, and I think it's a complete misreading of the culture. And there was this time in 2020 election when Trump was trying to win suburban voters by appealing to their dark fears of non-white voters moving to the suburbs, which I think is a complete misreading. The people that I know who live in the suburbs, overwhelmingly, right? If someone who was a different race, a different religion moved next door, they would go out of their way to show their kids that they should be welcoming. They're not going to go burn a cross in their yard. And betting on that America is just a losing bet. I think you see so much of the Republican Party is still uncomfortable with same-sex marriage. Which is one of the more remarkable issues to think about. In 2008, every presidential candidate, Democrat and Republican, opposed same-sex marriage. And now we don't even talk about it anymore. But I think that the hysteria and fear and animus that is directed toward trans by Republicans, for the most part, is really a way for them to express the fact that they never accepted same-sex marriage. And it's disproportionate.
Mm-hmm.
And look, you have kids. I mean, how many of their friends sit around debating whether or not, like gay people should get married? I mean, it's just like, like
Well
what?
done. Yeah.
It's done. Of course they should. Um,
Um, just highlighting that since 2016, there have been the lesson of pain has been hitting in 2018, those races,
yep,
2020, obviously, the Senate races in 2021. Every special election and every time Dobbs is on a specific ballot, it's moving against MAGA. And then, of course, 2023, same is carrying forward. The way I want to tee up our second to last pillar, the financiers of this effort, is specifically how they're funding the aspect of this that would put us in a very dark mood, and that's the third party threat and the no labels threat. Can you
yeah,
discuss that money?
yeah. Before we just leave, before we get on to that, I just want to say, that it's absolutely true that Trump has never gotten north of 47%. He got 46.2% in 16, which was enough to win because of these third-party votes. That's what allowed him to win. He got 46.9% in 20 and lost. Now, Mitt Romney lost with 47.2% of the vote. So you really can't blow Trump north of 47% with dynamite. I mean, you can't get there. So what does that mean? That means for Trump to win, you need to be able to win with 46.5 to 46.9% of the vote. How do you get there? Third parties. Now, look, I worked for Bush in 2000, and there is empirical evidence
Yep.
that you can make a very good case that were it not for Ralph Nader, Bush would not have won. And Bush did lose the popular vote for 500,000. Now, in Bush world, we used to darkly joke about this, that anybody can win elections when you get more votes. It takes professionals when you lose by 500,000. It doesn't seem so funny now. But, the great fear here in the presidential race is the electoral college. So for all of the 7 million plus votes that Biden won by, if a shockingly small number of people in exactly the right places change their vote, under 100,000 people, Trump still would have won. So you have these wealthy people who particularly are supporting No Labels. No Labels, I think, was a very well-intentioned organization that started about a decade ago to try to bring people together more, to try to bring more bipartisan support. I have dear friends that were involved in the founding of it. I think that's still a noble and good civic good. But when it extends to a presidential race, if you look No Labels will not release its finance, who their donors are. And they're not required to now by our screwed up election laws. But we know, like Harlan Crow, the guy who has been basically keeping Clarence Thomas,
Yeah.
like some, oligarch with a mistress. He's given a lot of money to No Labels. And where No Labels is trying to get on the ballot are in states, not like Louisiana or Mississippi, that, almost 100% are going to vote for Trump, but in these key swing states, like Wisconsin, where you're going to work, and Michigan, North Carolina. And it's, people, we kind of don't think about this a lot for good reason, but, you have to get 270 electoral votes to get to be president. What happens if you don't get 270 electoral votes? No candidate does. The election goes to the House of Representatives by the Constitution. How does the House of Representatives vote? Every state gets one vote. And how they vote is determined by the political makeup of the Congress people in that state. So Wyoming and California, they get the same number of votes. California would be Democratic because there's more Democratic congressmen. Wyoming would be Republican. And right now, if that was held and it went to the House of Representatives, a Republican would win. And there is no way an independent candidate can get to 270 electoral votes. I mean, so what is the most successful independent candidacy of modern era? Ross Perot. One thing that you and I and everybody watching this have in common is with Ross Perot, none of us have won an electoral college vote. Ross Perot didn't win one electoral college vote. So somehow No Labels is saying that somebody who, is going to get 270 electoral college votes? It's a fantasy.
Is there a group, isn't Joe Trippi involved with a group that's
So am I. Yeah.
targeting, and you are
Yeah,
the
there's a group
third-party threat?
put together by former Majority Leader Dick Gephardt, a Republican, Democrat from Missouri. Wonderful man, wonderful man. That has come together to try to bring sense to this, and it's working on a lot of different levels. And the Lincoln Project is also involved in it. A lot of the effort that Dick Gephardt is involved in, which suits his style, he's a very gentle, decent man, is educational, that people really don't understand this. He's also going to a lot of the donors.
Good.
Some of these people, they really do care about America, which is why they got involved in No Labels in the first place. And they really haven't thought about the implications of what this would mean.
Well, I think everyone here No Labels is a direct line to Autocracy and Trump.
Yep.
So if it comes up in
a vote for No
conversation,
Labels is a vote for Trump. A vote for RFK Jr., in all likelihood, is going to be increasing Trump. Trump has to be in an election in which he can win with under 47%. It's really that simple. And Joe Biden, well, any Democrat with the Electoral College now, needs to win the popular vote probably by 4 points or more. So if you see a poll that's a good poll and it's heading into election day and it's tied, that's not a good poll for Joe Biden. That means he's probably going to lose the Electoral College.
So to interject on the financiers theme with good news and what we can do. Good news is Biden's totally outraising Trump at the moment. So there's this dark, horrible money behind the third party threats. But the pro-democracy forces are funding, and on what you can do, early money, $1 today is worth 10 October
Yes.
15th. And so I also just signed up as part of my personal plan for a modest monthly amount now, not later. And just spreading that kind of behavior and making it normal, I think is very healthy.
I think that's critical. Also, after January 6th, a lot of the political arm of American corporations said that they would not give money to those who voted not to certify the elections.
Yes.
And for the most part, they did. They stuck to that. But the flaw in this is they don't give to that Republican candidate individually or that Republican member of Congress or senator individually. They give to the Republican Congressional Committee, which then gives the money to that person.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have Toyota, this is something the Lincoln Project was about. When you're giving to the Republican Senatorial Committee, you are giving money to people who voted not to certify the election. And I think that these corporations are very sensitive to political pressure from consumers. They're in the consumer business, for heaven's sakes, and I think that that is something that people to become aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Same way there's been an effort to try to end corporate sponsorship of Fox. That's been very successful.
Yeah, and the check my ads effort,
Yes.
exquisite one as well.
Yeah, it's been very, very successful. And that, this is something, there's something very weird in America, that there are people in America who have become vastly wealthy, like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, the Koch brothers, vastly wealthy in a way that they never could have become in any other system but the American system, without a doubt. And yet they seem determined to change that system and to make it, take it in a different way instead of protecting it. And when they move to autocracy, to me, it's madness. Would you rather be a CEO in California or Moscow?
Yeah. And then you see yesterday, they're choosing, even if they're choosing deregulation, you look at the activities in the House yesterday and you see the end of governing. So
Republican Party is not a governing party now.
yeah,
It's not.
that can't ultimately be good for business.
No, it's not. No, I mean,
Yeah.
look, the S&P 500 tripled under Obama, despite everything that we said as Republicans. It tripled, which isn't bad, 8 years. And stock market is at all-time highs with Biden. You have record low unemployment. You have rising wages. America produces more oil than any other country now. And which is one of the things that's driving the price of gas back down. And inflation's coming down. I mean, even Republicans with the latest job numbers were, Fox was forced to go. So, the great expansion of the American economy was in the 50s when we had much higher taxes and in many ways, a much more active government and business.
Mm-hmm.
It built the middle class. And that's, to me, the greatest danger because autocracies develop when there is a great disparity in economic distribution.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that increasingly in America. And it is very, very troubling.
One thing I've enjoyed seeing in the statistics of the last 2 years is the greatest correction in that disparity since the 60s. I had no idea that was also happening. So moving to our last of five, the shock troops, Stuart, I saw a line of Timothy Snyder's, another of our mutual favorites today, saying moving to the rule of fear over the rule of law.
Yes.
Can you talk about the importance of these
Yeah.
shock troops?
Yeah, the shock troops are an essential element in this. We saw them on January 6th, of course. And this is what Trump is appealing to, like in the debate that he had with Biden when he refused to denounce the Proud Boys. And we saw the impact of this when you read accounts of how people voted to certify the election. Liz Cheney has talked about this, that she would talk to her colleagues and they would say, Liz, I'd like to vote, but I'm afraid for my family. And Mitt Romney has said the same thing. And so has Adam Kinzinger. So that's not a democracy, right? If you're afraid that if you vote this way, someone is going to physically attack you, that's not a democracy. There was this biography of Mitt Romney that came out that revealed that he's spending an enormous sum of money on personal security for him and his family now. But most people can't afford that.
Yeah.
So it really is another one of these great lies that the Republican Party told, that it was a law and order party. Because how do when you glorify insurrectionists, when you try to call the police officer who was protecting members of Congress a murderer because he used deadly force to stop this riot. And to this day, I don't understand. To me, it's a miracle they didn't use more deadly force when that was happening. I mean, I was watching that and I said, well, like a lot of people are going to die. They're going to bring out automatic weapons. There are automatic weapons in those buildings. But they didn't. And a lot of cops suffered for it. They engaged in hand-to-hand combat with people who were prepared for that combat in some ways better than they were. But when Trump now says that if the courts rule against me, my people will take to the streets. This is what they're saying. If you look at what's happening in Texas on the border, when you had the governor directly disobeying the Supreme Court, a conservative court, that's a challenge to law and order. Now, we saw the same thing happen in the South after Brown versus Board of Education ruling for integration. This is how you end up at the University of Mississippi on Sunday in September 1962. One African-American, James Meredith, tried to enroll as the first African-American at the University of Mississippi. There was a riot. 2 people died. Federal marshals were attacked. Horrible scene. 5 days later, there were 30,000 National Guard troops in Oxford, Mississippi. 30,000 in a town of 7,000.
Mm-hmm.
So, arguably that was the last battle of the Civil War, and that battle ended up just like the Civil War. The famous example of Eisenhower sending the National Guard to integrate public schools in Little Rock. So these are challenges to the rule of law. And there is just such carelessness the way that these attorney generals in these Republican states sign on and say, well, we'll send our National Guard. So, I mean, think about that. Really, you're going to have National Guard fighting National Guard?
Mm-hmm.
There is a Canadian journalist named Stephen Marsh, very serious journalist, who has written a book that makes the case, and it's not a bad case, that the next American Civil War has started. And he compares where we are now, and it came out in 20, so it's 21, it's a little dated now, so it's even worse, to the years leading up to the Civil War. And as he says, what's the difference between January 6th and Fort Sumter? No one died at Fort Sumter. Um, and it is it's a very sobering aspect. There's always been these breakaway elements of right-wing movements in America. That's why a lot of them end up in the Pacific Northwest, or the Branch Davidians.
Yeah.
But they've been reduced to these small sects. And it should chill every American that Donald Trump chose the 30th anniversary of the Branch Davidian siege to go to Waco, Texas, where the Branch Davidians were, right outside Waco, to announce his presidential campaign. And if you haven't watched that announcement speech of his, I thought I knew what it said. I saw bits and pieces of it, read about it. But when I wrote this book, I made myself go watch it. It is a declaration of war against the United States as we know it today. There's no question about it. I am your vengeance. This is the last battle. It opens not with a Pledge of Allegiance to the United States, but the singing of this wacky insurrectionist anthem that a bunch of now convicts have sung. This is a movement to defeat democracy. And you have someone like J.D. Vance, senator from Ohio, who said 2 days ago, if I had been vice president, I wouldn't have certified the election. I would have thrown it back.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I guess you got to give J.D. credit. At least he's not even pretending to believe in the Constitution.
So I have one question on the shock troops front in the good news, what can we do category. Two things. The justice system seems to be working, and I am viewing it as deterrent. Over 1,000 of the January 6th prosecuted, tried, jailed. A lot of Trump's calls and threats for his people to show up
nobody shows
have
up.
been just a pathetic goofball.
More people go to a birthday party of a sixth grader than that. Yes.
Yeah. So he's having a hard time ginning up those troops, and I give so much credit to the prosecutors who have pulled that example together of consequence. Also, the defamation and associated threats of Shea and Moss, and then of E. Jean Carroll, have resulted in massive financial consequences for Giuliani and for Trump. So people are seeing material consequences for defamation and threat. Do you think, so my question is, do you think the cowardice, the abject cowardice that we're seeing on that side, we can play to our advantage?
Oh, yes, 100%. There was a famous exchange, sort of famous, because it's recounted in a wonderful book about Louisiana politics, The Earl of Louisiana, by A.J. Liebling, a New Yorker writer, one of my favorite writers. And Earl Long was Huey Long's younger, less famous brother, but in many ways, a much more interesting figure even than Huey Long. So he was very, like Huey Long, he was very much a moderate on race. So after the Brown versus Board of Education in the 50s came down, there was this leading segregationist, this flamboyant character named Leander Perez. He was from the South Louisiana, who gave a speech on the floor of Louisiana Senate calling on Earl Long to militarize the highway patrol to stop the federal government from enforcing integration. And Earl Long, there in the floor of the Senate, listened to him and said, well, now, Leander, that's great. I get that. But what are you going to do now that the feds have nuclear weapons? Which I thought, kind of puts it into it. And in these things, I like to bet on the side that is nuclear weapons, So, this is one of the reasons I think that so many people that we know in the military who are ex-military like our friend Dan Barkoff, who has the group Veterans for Responsible Leadership, former SEAL team member, are concerned about radicalization in the military. And you know, the difficulty with the unimaginable is that it's hard to imagine. So I think it's safe to say that if Trump won re-election, anybody around him is going to be someone who's going to enable him.
Yeah.
And you're not going to have even the modest backstops that were there in the first administration. So I think that it is very encouraging that the American legal system is working like the American legal system should.
Yeah.
But what do we do about a president who refuses to obey the Supreme Court? If Trump did, I mean, just these norms are still there. And look, Trump is running to pardon himself.
Yeah.
And he said that he's going to pardon everybody else that was involved in this insurrection.
So in
And
our
that's an example of autocrats using a democracy to end a democracy.
right.
They're going to use an election. And you know, Mitt Romney has spoken about this very eloquently, that democracies are held together by a civic fabric of trust. And someone has to be willing to lose. And now that you have planted the seed that our elections are crooked, that is very difficult to undo. You know, I work for presidential candidates that won, and I work for presidential candidates that lost. So the night Romney lost to Barack Obama, none of us went to bed afraid that the country was going to end or democracy was going to end. We lost the race. I mean, we were disappointed. We were tired. But it wasn't like, well, this is the end of America. It's how the system's supposed to work.
So in our remaining few minutes, Stuart, first I wanted to close that shock troops discussion with a what can we all do. I try to really take inspiration from the courage of the people who, you know, it took courage for E. Jean to do what she's doing. It took courage for the election officials to persist in their jobs and then participate in that follow-up litigation. So I think just taking every opportunity to
African-American poll workers.
Yeah.
Taking every opportunity to reject
is of great value. And then I thought, you know, there's nothing worse than asking people for questions and not answering them. So can we do a rapid fire
that
came in on the propaganda end? Could Biden possibly restore some version of the fairness doctrine in a way that would begin to contain this mind rot of propaganda we have?
Not to make it too long an answer, the fairness doctrine was a law that was in effect till 1988 that required news outlets to provide both sides, basically. And the fairness doctrine was abandoned in 1988. That's also the year, not by coincidence, that Rush Limbaugh started. The answer is, I think, no. You know, the fairness doctrine was very clunky. There was always a debate about what is both sides.
Right.
And if you just imagine now what it would be like if you tried to enforce that. So no, I don't think that there is a fairness doctrine solution.
Sign up with Resolute Square. Join us.
Yeah, sign up for Resolute Square. I think we have to do this by market forces in America.
Yeah, not right, not left, all democracy. Okay, do you have, we had one say, I think common ground for voters would be a desire to avoid nuclear war. Trump unilaterally canceled the Iran deal. Now look at the escalations.
Right.
You have thoughts on that as a get out the vote message?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, do you imagine it's just Donald Trump with nuclear weapons?
Yeah.
It's look, to me, in the 2016 primaries, Hewitt, conservative journalist, asked Donald Trump what his position was on the nuclear triad. And go back and read it. He gave the most incomprehensible answer. He had no idea what the nuclear triad was, which Marco Rubio, to his credit, when a question came to him, he said, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He talked about it like, it was like some threesome with models. And it's just amazing that we gave this guy nuclear. So
Amazing.
this is one of the things about Biden. It There is a steadiness to Joe Biden. In the past, when he ran for president, that was often interpreted as boorish. He was not the most electric, but now that's a positive.
Yeah.
He's someone who believes
I
in
think
the.
you're in the middle of answering this other question uh, about Dems' political marketing messaging. Should the Biden campaign need to go after Trump with more vigor and more frequency outside of Lincoln Project's good work? Or, as you're answering,
Well, look, I mean, the challenge that the Biden world has is they exist in two worlds. He's still president and they're still trying to govern. And then there's a campaign. This is the great freedom in the Lincoln Project. We're not in the governing business. Nobody says to us, how come you didn't pass that bill, dude? So, we can put a billboard of Jarrett and Ivanka in Times Square, and nobody goes to Joe Biden and says, how'd you let this happen? Um, and that's one of the reasons the Lincoln Project can be so effective, frankly. I think that when Biden gave his speech on the anniversary of January 6th, right before it,
yeah,
in Valley Forge, I think that's going to go down as a historic speech. He denounced Trump, and I think that they understand that they're going to make this a choice. They're not going to allow Donald Trump to run as if he hadn't been president. So a failed president, and you
yeah,
have to paint him as such, and you have to make Donald Trump dangerous. So I am a big fan of the Biden campaign. I think they ran a brilliant campaign in 20. It's incredibly hard to beat an incumbent president. I know, I've tried, I failed. Um, and I think that they are a very patient group
mhm,
and a very steady group. They don't panic. They don't respond to every news cycle. And I find that very confident. I will go on the record. I think Biden is going to win. I think he's going to win by a larger margin. And I think there's some chance that the 24 election could be like the 80 election in reverse, where Trump is going to be close until about October 15th, as Carter was, and then kind of the bottom's going to drop out. If I had to bet, I would go to Vegas and bet on that because I get good odds because a lot of people don't think that's going to happen. And it probably won't. It'll probably come down to these small states.
yeah.
But I think that Biden is going to win this election decisively.
I think, as Joe Turpie says, as long as we keep doing the work and
As
they
long as
keep
we
doing
keep
it
doing the work.
crazy. I'm missing one last question. Presidential press secretaries. Presidents used to hold more of their own direct press conferences. Do you see that distancing as
That's a great
contributing?
question.
Yeah.
It's a great question, and you're absolutely right. Presidents used to do a lot more of that. And one of the things I love about the English system is how the prime minister has to go in front of in their question hour.
Yeah.
And anybody in the House of Commons can throw a question at the prime minister. Um, I think it would be a good thing if we had more of that.
Yeah.
Um, I know for political reasons why the Biden campaign doesn't do it, why the Biden operation doesn't do it. I think it would be good. Harry Truman used to stand in front of the White House gates on the sidewalk and answer questions from the press,
Hmm.
or pretty much anybody else who walked by. So I think more of that is better. 100%.
I wanted to maybe close in our last minute, one really celebrating and thanking this partnership between Resolute Square and My5 Things. It's just a delight, and we're so grateful to everyone who joined tonight and in the future when the recording is available. I think this is such valuable material to cover. I know a buddy of ours, Trygve Olsen, really characterizes this democracy versus autocracy struggle that we're in as faith versus fear. And the faith is really in one another and in our institutions and in the ideal of democracy, struggling as it does. And autocracy feeds off the fear. And so just, I think all of us coming together really around your experience and wisdom, Stuart, is a form of faith. I hope everyone here is inspired to do the work. Try Field Team 6 as one place to get started, and then support the good organizations that are active right now, not later. So thank you so much, Stuart.
No, thank you, Megan. Thank you everyone for joining, and look forward to more of these with 5 Things in Resolute Square.